In this video, we're going to look at some hints and tips to help you when you've got your interview for the APM Project Professional qualification. I've noticed that sometimes people really struggle to sort of organise their thoughts. So we've been doing a lot of mock interviews and people struggle to sort of structure how they're going to answer the questions to make sure that they've covered all the parts on the marking scheme. So I've been looking at something called the STAR, and we've been using this with our recent cohorts, and they found it really, really useful in order to sort of structure the answers. So I hope you find this useful in terms of the way you present your answers for those verbal interviews. So we're going to look at what's the interview process for the professional qualification, and then how we could use the STAR model to help us prepare and answer those questions. So there are two parts to the PPQ interview. The first part is a scenario role play. And here the assessors will play the role of the sponsor typically, or a key stakeholder. And they will ask you to play the role of the project manager for the project, who's been appointed sort of about a week ago. And you'll get a mini brief that sits on top of the detailed brief that you've been given well in advance of the interview. And what they're looking for is that you communicate well and you set out logically how to resolve problems or take a decision or communicate or negotiate with a stakeholder. And they are often looking for you to take a decision based on the limited information that you have to hand, because that's one of the core competencies of project managers, that they can take decisions without all the information being available. The second part is where they'll choose 4 of the assessment criteria from the syllabus. And this can be quite narrow questions. For example, critically evaluate ways to provide leadership for this project and why it's important. So they won't ask you about general stakeholder management or general leadership. They'll just talk about visionary, how do we generate a vision? So for each of those assessment criteria on that syllabus, we need to be ready for answers for each of those. So how can STAR help us with this? So what I suggest is maybe you start off by setting the scene. So what's going on in the case study at the moment? And then think about what good, project management would look like, based on the principles of project management. What do you think good would look like? Now, clearly that's going to be tailored to the project. If it's a massive infrastructure project in the case study, you're going to be quite rigorous and have lots of systems and procedures and policies and processes in place. If it's a small, short, low-cost project with a small team, then you're not going to have those full formal. Have a much more simpler approach. So you need to think about what's the principle of project management, but how it's relevant to this case study. And then what action, so how can we implement those principles of project management in this case study? Give us 2 ways in which you can do it, the pros and cons of each. And then if it's an evaluate question, you need to have a recommendation. So how would you do it? And what do you expect the outcome to be? So here's an example. So the example question might be, provide visionary leadership for this project. So you start off by just a situation. There's no evidence in the case study of overall vision. And what we know from the APM's research in 2019, that the leadership skills for project managers, vision and leadership is an important part of those survival skills for effective project management and successful projects. So the task is to generate a simple, clear, unifying vision for the project. And ideally, we want the full leadership team to walk the talk, So how do we achieve that? Well, the action, there's a couple of ways in which we could do that. We could do, if you've got a visionary leader at the head of the project who's got a clear vision and maybe it's just not being communicated properly, then we could invite that leader to just come and present to the team, and then we'd have a clear vision that everybody would understand. However, as a project manager, if that leader doesn't have a clear vision, then it can be quite difficult to get them to communicate it. They may not have thought about your project. It may not be top of their agenda, So in that case, we can do a sort of bottom-up approach where we can work within the team, come up with a project vision and mission, get that signed off by the project board and the governance arrangements that we have, the steering group. So it's a sort of bottom-up vision that we've generated. And then in this case study, what do you think we should do? So let's say I think leadership in this case study have a clear vision. It's just not crystallized and communicated. So I think what we need to do is just get the sponsors to do a presentation to the team, sort of restating the vision for the project so that everybody understands what it is and we can all get behind it. So fairly simple. So that's one approach. Let's have a look at another one. This is a risk management question. So we have to read this question very carefully. Critically evaluate ways in which risks can be recorded. So it's about recording the risk. So it's risk registers. So situation is that the risk register is really poor, lacks the key details such as the risk priority. So we haven't analysed it on the probability impact grid. We don't know what the red, amber, green risks are. There are poor risk descriptions. They're not, cause, risk and effect, and the risks aren't uncertain. And the lack actions and action owners is out of date. It's not updated, and it's not being used to drive action within the project team. So what we need is a good risk register with proper fields, clear priorities, a risk owner, proper risk descriptions with the cause, the uncertainty in the risk and the effect, and effective risk reduction measures, whether they're opportunities or threats, to avoid, reduce, transfer, accept, enhance, all that sort of stuff. So how can we get there? Well, a couple of ways. I could sit down, I could draft out the risk register in Excel, I could just draw up a risk register, I could fill it in, and then I could socialise that with the team, get their feedback, and like a straw man approach. The problem with that would be biased by my view. I've only been here a week. I don't really understand the organisation. I don't think we got any other projects that I could look at to, form that basis of that risk register. So I don't think that would be a most effective approach, but it would be cheap, quick and easy to do. We could run a workshop with the team to populate the risk register either in Excel, or we could do it on a post-it chart and then transpose it. And then we could update that risk register as part of the monthly agenda. That would be good because you get more involvement and ownership within the team members. It take a bit of time, but it's not a massive project. I'm not going to have hundreds of risks. It's only going to be a quite short risk register, I think. So I think that's quite a practical approach. So I think my approach would be, what I'd recommend here is that we would populate the risk register as a team in a short workshop. And it's not a complex project. We don't need to do full Monty quantitative analysis stuff, Monte Carlo, all that sort of stuff. So we could probably do this reasonably quickly. So 2 questions, what's the situation? What do we want to achieve? What's the task? A couple of ways in which we can do that in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of each, and then the result that will help you achieve, and the recommendation, this is how I think we should do it. Couple of other things. You need to listen to the questions really carefully. So here's 2 questions, critical ways in which we can address the challenges and issues of conflict, and critical ways in which we can maintain awareness of the issues. Now, first question is about how you address them. So I'd be thinking of Thomas Kilmann's sort of like collaborate, compromise, competing, avoiding model. The second one is how you're going to be aware of conflicts and issues that are bubbling under. So a couple of ways I'd think there. So the traditional project controls, so your reporting, your progress meetings, you begin to see that there are challenges and conflicts within the team from the way people formally report. But then informal, conversations that you have with people in the corridor or over coffee or over lunch, or just on the phone, you'll also get a feel for whether there's issues and conflicts emerging. I expect the other way, is people fill in an issue register. I don't think everyone's volunteered to do that, but I expect in theory they could raise an issue formally. So don't be afraid of asking for clarification. So what I recommend is that people write down the question. So when they ask you the question, grab a pen, write down what they say, underline the key bits, challenges, issues and conflict, awareness of challenges, issues and conflicts. feed it back. So what you want me to do is to talk about how I would be aware of issues and conflicts that might occur in the project team. Get the assessors to say, yeah, that's what we want you to talk about, and then go into STAR. So it gets you in the right page, you know, because if you just launch into it, you just go, oh my God, I'm just panicking. So ask clarifications and make sure you answer the question that's asked. It's really important that you focus on answering the question that's asked. So how do you prepare? You know exactly what the questions are going to be because they're in the assessment criteria. So there's no reason why you can't sit down and go through each of those assessment criteria and analyze the case study against the assessment criteria. In fact, you know, that's what we would do at an exam prep. And you can work with others. So when you're practicing your STAR method, you know, when you do your mock interview with me, we'll practice that technique in the mock interview, but there's no reason why you can't do mock interviews with each other. Find somebody else who's also preparing for this course and practice with each other using the STAR method to answer their questions. And remember, you have to relate it to project management. This happens quite often. People go, oh, well, I just, you know, how would I deal with a change? I'd hold a meeting to discuss it. No, you wouldn't. You'd follow the change control process. Yeah, so we'd identify the change, we'd assess the change, and we'd then recommend what to the steering body, how that change would be discussed. So that's the meeting that people often talk about. They go, well, I'd have a meeting with the sponsor. Sort of like jump to the end and miss out the middle bit. So you have to describe the principles of project management and use those to guide your answer. So remember, this is only a sort of brief overview of what to do. And you know, if you need more detailed preparation and training, then I've included the link to our Parallel Project Training website. So I do wish you all the best in your PPQ interviews and assessments. I hope you find STAR is a useful framework, and I recommend that you use each of the acceptance criteria and think about how STAR might apply to each of those acceptance criteria. And if you do that, I'm sure you'll be successful in your PPQ assessment.